They thought she was just another flight attendant serving coffee and checking seatbelts. Rachel Torres had been working the same domestic route for 3 years, always polite, always professional, never drawing attention to herself. But when 5 armed men stormed the cabin and took control of Flight 447, everything changed. The passengers had no idea that their friendly flight attendant was actually Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres, former Delta Force operator with 7 years of special operations experience. What happened next would redefine everything they thought they knew about the people who serve them every day. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this story of hidden valor and unexpected protection, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. The morning sun cast golden light through the terminal windows at Denver International Airport as Rachel Torres adjusted her navy blue uniform and checked her appearance in the crew bathroom mirror. At 31, she possessed the practiced smile and composed demeanor that passengers expected from airline personnel. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in regulation style, her makeup understated but professional, her movements efficient but unhurried. To anyone watching, Rachel appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a dedicated flight attendant for Continental Airways with 3 years of exemplary service record. What her personnel file didn't reveal was that those 3 years represented the longest period Rachel had spent in one location since joining the military at 18. Flight 447 from Denver to Chicago was Rachel's regular Tuesday morning assignment, a routine domestic route that she could handle in her sleep. The Boeing 737 seated 150 passengers, typically filled with business travelers, vacationing families, and the occasional, nervous first-time flyer who needed extra reassurance. Captain James Morrison was already conducting his pre-flight checklist when Rachel entered the aircraft. At 55, Morrison was a veteran pilot with over 25,000 flight hours and the steady demeanor that came from decades of safe operation. "Morning, Rachel," he called from the cockpit. "Weather looks good for Chicago. Should be a smooth flight." "Perfect," Rachel replied, beginning her own pre-flight inspection of the cabin. "I'll have the safety equipment checked and be ready for boarding in 15 minutes. As Rachel moved through the aircraft, her eyes performed a routine that looked like standard safety procedures but was actually something more comprehensive. She checked emergency exits, noted the location of potential weapons like fire extinguishers and emergency axes, and mentally cataloged sight lines throughout the cabin. To fellow crew members, she appeared thorough. To anyone with military training, she would have appeared to be conducting a tactical assessment. The habit had been ingrained during 7 years with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, where situational awareness meant the difference between successful missions and catastrophic failures. Even though Rachel had been officially retired from military service for 4 years, some instincts never faded. Boarding commenced at 8:30 a.m. with the usual mix of passengers. Rachel greeted each one with genuine warmth, helping with carry-on luggage, directing people to their seats, and answering questions about flight duration and connecting flights. But as the stream of passengers continued, something began to trouble her. 5 men, boarding separately throughout the process, displayed subtle behavioral markers that triggered her trained recognition systems. They avoided eye contact with each other, but maintained awareness of each other's positions. Their carry-on bags were identical in size and weight distribution. Most telling, they all wore the same style of digital watch and moved with the controlled precision of people with military or paramilitary training. Rachel continued her duties without any outward change in demeanor, but internally she had shifted into assessment mode. The 5 men had positioned themselves strategically throughout the aircraft, 2 in first class, 2 in the middle section, and 1 toward the rear. Their seating arrangement provided coverage of all major cabin areas and emergency exits. As the final passengers boarded, Rachel caught the eye of her colleague, flight attendant Jennifer Wall, and subtly indicated that she would handle the safety demonstration alone. Jennifer, assuming Rachel was simply being helpful, gladly accepted the offer to focus on final boarding preparations. During the safety demonstration, Rachel's trained eyes confirmed her suspicions. All 5 men ignored the presentation entirely, instead focusing on crew movements and passenger distribution. When she demonstrated the location of emergency exits, she noticed them tracking her explanations with tactical interest rather than casual attention. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom as they pushed back from the gate. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Morrison speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight to Chicago this morning with an estimated flight time of 2 hours hours and 18 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare for takeoff. As Flight 447 climbed through 10,000 feet, Rachel continued her normal service routine while maintaining discreet observation of the 5 suspicious passengers. During beverage service, she noticed that none of them ordered alcohol, all declined snacks, and each made brief eye contact with her that lasted exactly long enough to assess her as a potential threat. Rachel had encountered similar behavioral patterns during counter-terrorism operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. These men weren't ordinary passengers. They were operatives of some kind, possibly preparing for an action that would occur once the aircraft reached cruising altitude. 23 minutes into the flight, her suspicions were confirmed. The man in seat 3A stood up suddenly and moved toward the rear lavatory. As he passed Rachel, who was collecting trash in the aisle, he made brief contact with her shoulder. To passengers, it appeared accidental. To Rachel, it felt like the tactical assessment of someone checking her positioning and response time. 30 seconds later, the man in seat 12C followed the same path. Then the others began moving in a coordinated pattern that any observer with military training would recognize as a standard 4-point tactical deployment. Rachel continued collecting trash with the same professional smile, but her body had shifted into combat readiness. Her breathing deepened and slowed. Her weight settled onto the balls of her feet. Her free hand positioned itself near the service cart where she could access improvised weapons if necessary. At exactly 9:47 a.m., the coordinated attack began. The 5 men moved simultaneously, producing weapons that had been concealed in various items throughout their carry-on luggage. Ceramic knives that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, improvised explosive devices disguised as electronic equipment, and restraint materials that appeared to be ordinary travel accessories. "Nobody move," shouted the apparent leader, a tall man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "This aircraft is now under our control." Chaos erupted instantly. Passengers screamed, children began crying, and people instinctively ducked in their seats. The businessman in 8F fumbled for his phone, trying to call for help. A woman traveling with 2 young children pulled them protectively against her body. But Rachel Torres didn't react like a civilian flight attendant faced with a terrorist attack. Instead, she shifted into the mindset that had been drilled into her during thousands of hours of Delta Force training. Assess, prioritize, act. In the split second while passengers were still processing what was happening, Rachel cataloged the tactical situation. 5 armed hostiles with coordinated positioning. Approximately 140 civilian passengers, creating obstacles and potential casualties. Limited space for maneuvering. No backup unless she could reach the cockpit communication system. The leader continued barking commands while his associates began corralling passengers into specific sections of the aircraft. "Everyone remain seated. Hands where we can see them. Anyone who attempts to interfere will be killed immediately." Rachel maintained her position near the service cart, hands visible, expression showing the appropriate level of fear for a civilian crew member. But her eyes were tracking movement patterns, measuring distances, and calculating response options. One of the terrorists approached her directly. "You," he said, gesturing with his weapon. "Move to the front of the aircraft. Now." Rachel nodded submissively and began walking forward. But as she moved, she palmed a heavy-duty flashlight from the service cart and positioned it along her forearm where it wouldn't be immediately visible. The motion appeared to be nervous fidgeting with her uniform. "Where are the other crew members?" the terrorist demanded. "Galley," Rachel replied quietly, indicating the forward service area where Jennifer and the 3rd flight attendant had been preparing meal service. What happened next occurred so quickly that most passengers couldn't fully process the sequence of events. As the terrorist turned his attention toward the galley, Rachel moved with the fluid precision of someone who had neutralized hostile targets in much more challenging environments than a commercial aircraft. The flashlight came around in a perfect arc, striking the pressure point behind his ear with calculated force. He dropped without making a sound. Before his weapon hit the floor, Rachel had already pivoted toward the second nearest threat. The terrorist in the aisle was still processing his partner's collapse when Rachel's knee connected with his solar plexus, followed immediately by an elbow strike to the base of his skull as he doubled over. The remaining 3 terrorists reacted with the trained responses of military operatives, but they were facing someone whose training had been designed specifically to counter such responses. Rachel used the narrow aircraft aisle to her advantage, preventing them from surrounding her, while systematically engaging each target with techniques that prioritize speed and efficiency over dramatic effect. The 3rd terrorist attempted to grab a passenger as a human shield, but Rachel anticipated the move. She slid under his reaching arm and delivered a precise strike to his kidney, followed by a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. The fourth terrorist had better tactical awareness and tried to create distance while drawing a backup weapon. Rachel closed the gap with a diving tackle that brought them both to the floor, where her ground fighting training allowed her to gain control and neutralize him before he could bring his weapon to bear. The fifth and final terrorist, realizing his operation had been completely compromised, attempted to detonate what appeared to be an explosive device. Rachel crossed the remaining distance between them in a sprint that would have impressed her old drill instructors, delivering a strike that severed the connection between his hand and his brain before he could complete the triggering sequence. The entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. In the stunned silence that followed, Rachel quickly secured the improvised weapons and checked each unconscious terrorist for additional threats. Her movements remained calm and professional, as if she had just completed routine safety procedures rather than single-handedly neutralized a coordinated hijacking attempt. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying the same warm tone she had used during the safety demonstration, "please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. I need to communicate with the captain." As she moved toward the cockpit communication system, passengers stared in shock at the woman they had known as their friendly flight attendant. The businessman in 8F slowly lowered his phone, his mouth hanging open. The mother with 2 children clutched them closer, her eyes wide with amazement rather than fear. Rachel activated the cabin-to-cockpit communication system. "Captain Morrison, this is Rachel. We've had a security incident in the cabin that has been resolved. 5 individuals attempted to take control of the aircraft. All threats have been neutralized and are in custody." There was a long pause before Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the speaker. "Rachel, did you say you resolved a hijacking attempt?" "Yes, sir. Recommend we divert to the nearest major airport with appropriate security response capabilities. Also recommend medical attention for the detained individual." "Rachel," Captain Morrison said carefully, "are you telling me that you, personally, stopped 5 armed hijackers?" "That's correct, Captain." Another pause. "What exactly do you do when you're not serving coffee?" "That's classified, sir." As Flight 447 diverted to Kansas City International Airport, Rachel returned to her normal duties as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. She checked on shaken passengers, provided reassurance to the children who had been frightened by the commotion, and began preparing the cabin for an emergency landing. But word of what had happened spread quickly among the passengers. The businessman in 8F approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. That was incredible." "Just doing my job," Rachel replied with the same professional smile she had worn throughout the flight. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking," said the woman with the 2 children, "what kind of training does a flight attendant receive for situations like that?" Rachel considered her response carefully. "The airline industry takes passenger safety very seriously. We receive extensive training for various emergency scenarios." It was technically true, though it omitted the 7 years of Delta Force training that had actually prepared her for this situation. As they approached Kansas City, Rachel could see through the cabin windows that the airport had been cleared for their arrival. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, and what appeared to be federal agents were positioning themselves near the terminal. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making an unscheduled stop in Kansas City due to the security incident. You'll be met by federal authorities who will need to speak with each of you briefly. I want to personally thank our flight attendant Rachel Torres, whose quick thinking and professional response ensured everyone's safety today." The passengers erupted in spontaneous applause, but Rachel maintained her professional composure, even as she felt the weight of exposure settling on her shoulders. Her cover identity was about to become much more complicated. Flight 447 landed without incident, and federal agents boarded immediately to secure the 5 unconscious hijackers. As passengers were evacuated, many stopped to thank Rachel personally. Some asked for her contact information. A few wanted to take photos with her. Through it all, Rachel remained polite but distant, knowing that her life was about to change dramatically. The FBI debriefing lasted 6 hours. Special Agent Maria Gonzalez led the questioning in a secure conference room at the Kansas City field office. Rachel sat across from her, still wearing her flight attendant uniform, answering questions with the same careful precision she had used during military intelligence briefings. "Miss Torres," Agent Gonzalez began, "your personnel file indicates you worked as a flight attendant for Continental Airways for 3 years prior to today's incident. What training did you receive that enabled you to neutralize 5 armed terrorists?" "Standard airline safety training plus some personal self-defense courses," Rachel replied. Agent Gonzalez consulted her notes. "The 5 individuals you apprehended have been identified as members of a domestic terrorist cell with connections to international extremist organizations. They were carrying sophisticated weapons and explosives that could have destroyed the aircraft. The precision precision with which you neutralize them suggests training far beyond civilian self-defense courses. Rachel maintained her composure. I take personal protection seriously. Miss Torres, we've run background checks on every crew member and passenger aboard Flight 447. Your background check came back with several classified flags that require special authorization to access. Would you like to explain that? For the first time, Rachel hesitated. Her cover identity had served its purpose for 3 years, but today's events had blown it completely. There was no way to explain her combat skills without revealing her military background. Agent Gonzalez, I think you need to contact the Department of Defense Special Operations Command. They'll be able to provide appropriate background information. Agent Gonzalez made a note. Are you saying you have military experience? I'm saying that some aspects of my background require higher security clearance to discuss. The breakthrough came 4 hours later when a stern-faced man in a dark suit entered the conference room. The FBI agents immediately deferred to his authority. Mr. Torres, he said, settling into a chair across from her. I'm Director Vasquez from Defense Intelligence. We need to discuss your current operational status. Rachel straightened slightly. Sir, I'm currently assigned to extended leave status following completion of my active duty commitment. Not anymore, Director Vasquez replied. As of today's incident, your civilian cover has been compromised. We need to discuss your next assignment. Agent Gonzalez looked confused. Civilian cover. Director Vasquez produced a classified folder. Agent Gonzalez, Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres, is a decorated Delta Force operator with 7 years of special operations experience. Her assignment as a flight attendant was part of a deep cover operation to monitor potential terrorist threats to commercial aviation. The revelation hit the FBI team like a physical blow. They had been interrogating an undercover special operations soldier who had been doing exactly what she was trained to do. The 5 terrorists she neutralized today were part of a larger cell planning coordinated attacks on commercial aircraft. Director Vasquez continued. Sergeant Torres's intervention prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. Agent Gonzalez set down her pen. How long has she been undercover? 3 years. This operation has been monitoring and disrupting domestic terrorism networks that specifically target commercial aviation. Today's success demonstrates the value of having trained operatives in positions where they can respond immediately to threats. Rachel remained silent during the exchange, knowing that her future was being decided by people with security clearances far above her own level. What happens now? Agent Gonzalez asked. Director Vasquez closed the folder. Sergeant Torres will be reassigned to a new operational role. Her cover as a flight attendant is no longer viable, but her skills are needed elsewhere. 6 months later, Rachel Torres stood in the training facility at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, wearing the uniform of a special operations instructor. Her new assignment involved training the next generation of Delta Force operators in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue techniques. The story of Flight 447 had become legend within special operations community, though the public version focused on extraordinary heroism by a trained flight attendant, rather than revealing the military background that had made such heroism possible. Rachel occasionally thought about her 3 years as a flight attendant, serving coffee and checking seatbelts while secretly protecting passengers who never knew they needed protection. It had been good cover, allowing her to monitor potential threats while maintaining the anonymity that special operations required. But she didn't miss the constant vigilance that undercover work required. At Fort Bragg, she could be herself again. Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres, Delta Force operator, trainer of America's most elite soldiers. Sometimes, late at night, she would receive encrypted messages from other operatives still working in civilian roles. Teachers, mechanics, store clerks, and office workers who were actually highly trained soldiers protecting American citizens from threats they would never know existed. The network was larger than most people could imagine, filled with ordinary-looking people doing extraordinary work in complete anonymity. Rachel had been part of that hidden army for 3 years, and now she was training others to take similar roles. The passengers on Flight 447 had returned to their normal lives, carrying with them an extraordinary story about the flight attendant who saved them all. Some tried to contact Rachel through the airline, wanting to thank her again or stay in touch. But Staff Sergeant Rachel Torres had returned to the shadows where special operations soldiers belonged. Her replacement on Continental Airways was another friendly professional flight attendant who served coffee with a smile and helped passengers with their luggage. Like Rachel, she was polite, efficient, and completely unremarkable. Unlike Rachel, she had never neutralized 5 armed terrorists in 90 seconds. But that didn't mean she couldn't. Have you ever wondered about the ordinary people around you who might possess extraordinary skills? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us us know what city you're watching from today. Thank you for watching Secrets Never Told. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with others who appreciate tales of hidden heroes and everyday guardians. These stories matter, and your support helps us tell them. Until next time, remember that protection often comes from the most unexpected sources, and the person serving you coffee might be the one standing between you and danger.